Jaya Radha Madhava Punya Vihari. Hare Krishna. I am honored to be here and delighted to share with you my experience of meeting Prabhupada and how perfect questions, perfect answers came about. Question is, how did I end up meeting Prabhupada and sitting near the bank of the Ganges at Mayapur when there was nothing there and talk to him for several days? I also asked that question. How in the world did that happen to me? And I was, as typical of my generation, a seeker. And due to a disability, when other kids would play ball, I was in the woods reading philosophy and meditating. So Krishna gave me a special blessing and having to be by myself and read. So when I read the Gita, I was amazed by it. And I saw the devotees chanting in New York City in Greenwich Village. I was captivated. It was one of those songs that wouldn't leave my head, 1968. I just got stuck in my head. Sometimes you hear a radio and you can't get rid of the song. So that was Hare Krishna. I couldn't get rid of it. And then after studying Oriental philosophy in college, my professor said, you better go to India. And I realized I really needed to go to India to understand what was behind the Gita. So I didn't want to go as a tourist. So I signed up for the American Peace Corps, which paid a huge salary of a few hundred rupees a month, and went off to be a science teacher in a rural part of India. As Krishna would arrange, it was the closest assignment to Calcutta, which meant I could take an overnight train and go to Calcutta. Being somewhat homesick, I'd like to visit a big city. And there I saw Giriraj Brahmachari then speaking at a public pandal. That was the first time I had been living in India. Somebody actually made philosophical sense. I said, I got to hear more. So whenever I could break away, I'd take the 14-hour train ride into Calcutta, stay at the Salvation Army hostel, and visit the temple. One time I was visiting, and devotee said, we're doing food relief. There was just a war between India and Pakistan, as regularly happens there. And there were a lot of refugees from East Pakistan, which was now Bangladesh. And they were doing a food program. I said, okay, that sounds good. I really had my own schedule. I had no supervisor. No one from the Peace Corps knew what I was doing. So I said, okay, I'll run up to whatever a Mayapur is. I had no idea, and help with food relief. When I got there was nothing. There were some tents, a hut for Prabhupada, which is a bhajan kutir, a pandal tent, men's tent, women's tent. It was just rice paddies. Now there are shops everywhere. There was literally nothing to buy. Water was from a fresh tube well, which meant the water looked like chalk. But that was okay. When 22, camping out's kind of fun. And it turns out there was about 60, 70 devotees, almost all Western, and one guest. Me. And so Prabhupada had mercy on me, knowing he had 60 zealot preachers and one person to preach to, because there were no other guests. Just some Bengali villagers came, but they were even Muslim and not English speakers. Remember, all the devotees, there were virtually no Indian devotees. So Prabhupada kept me in his hut with him for 3 days. And first conversation was not recorded. But there was always a shortage of cassette tapes in India because you couldn't buy them there. They had to come from the West. So Shyamasundar's secretary, after the first conversation, says, this sounds good, and hit the record button. I didn't even know he hit it. It was fine with me, but I had no idea. I thought I was alone in the room with Prabhupada and Shyamasundar. Later, I found out the whole doorway to the room was all heads all the way around, people listening. I had no idea. Prabhupada was so mesmerizing that I just sat at his feet, stared at his feet, and said, so you have some questions? And I sure did. And he enjoyed the conversation, apparently, because he kept, I was serving out prasadam, and I kept getting calls, Prabhupada wants to see you. And then Krishna says in the Gita, just approach a spiritual master, inquire submissively, and the spiritual master can render you the truth because he's self-realized. Well, accidentally, I hit the right formula. I was rendering service. I was feeding refugees whenever I had a break, and there were thousands and thousands of them. I inquired submissively because I said, I don't know if this is the highest truth, but I like the mantra. I like the guru. Let me just assume that this is the best truth and not challenge. I just want to learn. And then later on, I'll digest it and try to understand it deeper. So by total accident, I entered with the right attitude, and then the magic began. I wonder about why is the book so timeless? Why is it translated to 70 languages, the most translated book after the Gita in the BBT? And why is it so popular? And I do wonder about that. The best I could come up with is I approached Prabhupada with the right attitude. I want to learn something. I was rendering service, as I talked about, that's what the Gita says to do. And I thought about these issues for 10 years because I had a little unusual childhood that way. And so something inside me really wanted to know. I came with the attitude we find in George Harrison's plaintive song, this was pleading song, My Sweet Lord, I really want to know you. And so I had that attitude. I wanted to know my relationship with God. I always knew there was a supreme person. I had no doubt about that. I also knew that I couldn't die, nor could any of you die. But people were dying. And that was a mystery that bothered me since I was 10 years old, that intuitively no one could really die. Yet I would see people die. And I wanted to understand how to resolve that issue. So I had some, I think, questions that are universal. I also had a science background. I already completed my first degree in science. So I wanted to approach this from a scientific point of view, though Prabhupada dragged me to a much better place, a philosophical point of view. So I went in with one, and then Prabhupada transitioned it. Prabhupada also did something quite miraculous. He made it personal. Because I went in theoretical, I wonder about this, I wonder about that. And then on the full moon night of Gaura Purnima, this was February 1972 Gaura Purnima festival, Prabhupada demanded a festival be held on the land that was just purchased, so there was nothing there. So the devotee said, what do we do? There's nothing there. Prabhupada said, make something. So they made tents and a hut. So it was full moon night. Prabhupada had spoken to me quite a bit. And the wonderful, amazing Yamuna, who sings the Govinda prayers every day, she came up to me under the full moon. There was no electricity, but on the full moon with tears in her eyes glistening. And she came up to me and said, you are so fortunate. Prabhupada's giving you every waking minute. He was. I was like the next to last devotee that Prabhupada spent a lot of time with cultivating, because by then Prabhupada lived in a bubble and couldn't cultivate individuals like in the old days on 26 Second Avenue, thousands of devotees. But because I was the only visitor, I got lucky. The next devotee after that Prabhupada cultivated, maybe personally, it was probably Bhakti True Swami. So, and she kept telling me how lucky I was. Well, I didn't want to hear that. And I got nervous because what's going to happen to me? I'm going to have to lose my hair, which obviously is going to happen anyway, it turns out. And I'm going to lose all my attachments. And I was already, before I went to India, engaged to be married. I said, ooh, this isn't going to work very well. And after she said that to me, I went behind the pandal and just did something unusual for me. I just fell on the ground crying. What do I do? So the next morning, Prabhupada calls me in and says, I say to him, I have to leave now. And Prabhupada goes, leave, do not talk. And he spells Leave, talk Live. I said, so you want me to stay? He goes, yes. I said, okay, I'll stay here longer. Because I had said to him, I have to go back to my teaching. I really didn't, because no one knew what I was doing. I was so remote. The Peace Corps never visited me when I was there. So no one knew what I was doing. I knew whatever I wanted. For my, my few hundred rupees a month, nobody bothered me. And so I said, okay, I'll stay. And Prabhupada then said to me, good boy. Just like for any of you who have a pet dog, that's what you say, good boy. So at that moment, I knew I was Prabhupada's dog. So the conversation begins very theoretical. It begins with science and then morphs into philosophy and then morphs into what does it take for my personal struggle to understand Krishna consciousness. I think that's an extremely universal theme among inquiring people who approach Krishna consciousness. So, how did that conversation with Prabhupada affect my life, and how is that relevant to readers who are reading it in 2025? Well, it affected my life in that I realized by the end of the conversation that Prabhupada was the teacher I was looking for. So at that point, all I wanted to do was do something for Prabhupada, because he did something wonderful for me. And why and how is it relevant for people now? Prabhupada is more accessible to devotees joining today than he was to me. You might say, well, I was sitting with Prabhupada, I'm on his feet. But Prabhupada is a complex person. He can be in the mood of a scholar, the mood of a debater, and the mood of a friend, too. Prabhupada was a person, not an object. And at that time, we would sometimes view Prabhupada more distant. But now there's these great biographies, Yogeshwar's biography, Miracle on Second Avenue, Yamuna's book, the amazing book by Vishaka, 4 years, 11 months. So devotees today have more access to understanding Prabhupada than I did then, even being with him. So devotees today do have some advantage. Perfect questions, I didn't think it would end up ever so timeless. The way the book came about, the title, is after the conversation, Shyamasundar turns to Prabhupada and says, Prabhupada, those are perfect answers to my questions. And Prabhupada goes, yes, we'll make a book. And he named it Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers. Now that title is always a little problematic for me, because I don't think I asked perfect questions, but somehow Prabhupada made my lame questions into perfection. And even if I asked the wrong question, he would give the right answer. That was this ability Prabhupada had. So I think the relevance comes from Prabhupada, and the accessibility to Prabhupada has increased, not decreased, over the years. After I met Prabhupada in Mayapur, I saw him in Kolkata. And I said, there were 60 devotees in Mayapur. Each of them told me what was most important for my spiritual advancement. Now I'm very confused. Somebody said getting up early. Somebody said the cold shower, reading the books, chanting. Each of them told me what was most important to them. But what was most important to me? So I asked Prabhupada, how do I know? And he told me the answer. It's a brilliant answer. It's good association. If I associate with people that trust me and I trust them, all the answers come about. So we always must choose good association. We'll be kind to all devotees, respectful, but who we reveal our mind to, who we're intimate with, that is very important. So that's my closing words, if that helps. It's a great honor to be speaking at this group. I hope I don't overstate what I know, because I am a lifelong student and always everyday learning. So, but I'm just trying to share a little bit of what I experienced. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.